For most of human history, sleep was not something you earned after reaching safety. It was something the human body tried to do before safety had fully arrived. In the dark, on the ground, in shifting weather, surrounded by insects, animals, strangers, and the quiet sounds of nearby people. Rest did not mean protection. It meant a temporary letting go, carefully limited, never fully complete. Long before walls, logs, raised beds, or safe places to sleep at night, the body still had to close its eyes somewhere. That may be the colder truth. Human beings did not first become safe and then learn to sleep. They slept while danger was still there. If that was the normal condition for most of human life, why did 90% of human history sleep without safety? The oldest problem with human sleep may not have been how to rest, but how to let go without ever being fully protected. A modern room teaches the body a comforting order. First the door closes, then the light softens, then the body lets go. Safety seems to come first, and sleep follows after. Yet for most of human history, that order was likely reversed. Human beings did not wait for a sealed and reliable world before closing their eyes. They belonged to open ground, changing weather, uncertain shelter, unstable firelight, and the constant presence of other living things. In such conditions, sleep could not have meant a complete absence of threat. It was not a reward given by a controlled environment. It was a biological need that continued even when control was limited. That is where the title of this story begins to make sense. To say that humans slept without safety does not mean every night was a disaster, or that all ancient sleep was filled with terror. It means that for a very long stretch of human existence, sleep happened in settings where protection was partial, fragile, and often shared rather than guaranteed. The body still needed darkness, rest, memory repair, and the slow recovery that comes with sleep. But the world around it did not pause to provide ideal conditions. Long before cities, walls, locks, glass windows, raised beds, and climate control, human sleep belonged to a world that stayed unfinished at night. The ground held cold and moisture. The air carried smell and sound. The limits of vision changed after sunset. A place good enough for rest might still be exposed, temporary, or dependent on other people nearby. What we call a safe night today is often the result of many build layers architecture, stored fuel, social order, medicine, tools, and habits repeated across generations. Early humans did not begin with those layers. They began with a body that needed sleep anyway. That detail matters because it changes the way we picture the human past. It is easy to imagine sleep as a peaceful universal constant, something unchanged across all cultures and all eras. But the need to sleep is universal in one sense, while the conditions in which sleep happens are deeply shaped by history. A person lying down in a locked house is not only using a mattress. That person is resting inside thousands of years of accumulated separation from wind, darkness, animals, strangers, and uneven ground. Remove those layers one by one, and the meaning of sleep starts to shift. It becomes less private, less sealed, less certain. Near the beginning of human life as a species, that older meaning was likely closer to the norm. Sleep was not the final step after perfect security had been achieved. It was a necessary pause taken inside a world that still moved, still sounded, still cooled, still carried risk. This does not require us to invent dramatic scenes or claim more certainty than the evidence allows. We do not need to imagine every prehistoric night in detail to see the bigger point. For most of the time humans have existed, they were not sleeping in the kind of environments modern people now treat as ordinary. Their nights were shaped by exposure more than enclosure, by closeness more than privacy, and by the limits of the body more than the comforts of design. The central paradox is simple and cold. Human sleep evolved not in a perfect refuge, but in a world where refuge was incomplete. The body learned to rest not after danger had fully disappeared, but while some part of danger remained unresolved. That older order may be one of the deepest facts hidden beneath modern sleep. Even now, when we close our doors and believe the night has finally become still, a sleeping body is never as capable as a waking one. That is true in any century under any sky, and it becomes more important the farther back we look toward the beginning of human life. To sleep is to accept a temporary narrowing of the senses. The eyes close, awareness changes, muscles loosen in different ways, reaction slow, attention, which by day can move quickly across distance, sound, and movement, no longer surveys the world with the same sharpness. Even in modern life, this remains the strange bargain of sleep. The body requires it, Yet the body also becomes easier to surprise while it is happening. In a fully protected environment, that bargain feels manageable. In the deeper human past, it likely carried a different weight. This does not mean early humans were uniquely fragile or that they lived in constant fear. It means only that the biological act itself already carried a cost. To rest was to reduce immediate control over the world. For a species whose long history began in open and changeable environments, that reduction could never have been meaningless. The question is not whether sleep was possible. Of course it was possible, because human beings survived and continued. The more revealing question is what sleep could realistically have felt like in conditions where the body remained exposed to ground, weather, sound, temperature, and the presence of many other organisms. Near the start of our species, human life did not unfold inside sealed structures built to preserve a stable night. It unfolded in landscapes where the body was always in some relation to the outside. Under those circumstances, sleep was likely less like entering a separate protected zone and more like lowering oneself partway out of alertness while still remaining inside the living world. That difference matters because it changes the title from a metaphor into biology. To say humans slept without safety is not just to describe the outside environment. It is also to describe the fact that the body itself cannot sleep and guard with equal strength at the same time. One function rises as the other fades. Sleep restores, but it also compromises. The same nervous system that needs recovery cannot maintain full outward watch forever. So the human condition was never simply to choose between sleep and danger, as if one could wait for danger to vanish first. The older condition was that sleep had to happen while some uncertainty remained. Even today, traces of that condition are easy to recognize. A sudden sound at night can wake a person faster than the same sound during the day might get attention. An unfamiliar room often changes how easily sleep arrives. The body can settle, yet not settle completely. These are ordinary experiences, and they do not prove exact prehistoric patterns, but they do remind us that human sleep has never been a magical escape from the body's vulnerability. It is a managed state, not an invincible one. That would have been no less true for people living much closer to the beginning of human history, before long-built layers of nighttime protection became common. The need for sleep came from the body's limits, but the risks of sleep came from those same limits. Early humans inherited no perfect solution to that tension. They inherited a body that had to pass through the night by partially giving up its powers. If there was any safety in that process, it would often have been incomplete, borrowed from companions, shelter, fire, terrain, or habit, rather than guaranteed by the body alone. This is why the human story of sleep begins not with comfort, but with compromise. The body could not stay awake forever. Yet the world did not stop being demanding just because the body was tired. Somewhere near the origin point of human life, that simple fact may have shaped every night. Rest was necessary, but the sleeper never stopped being a vulnerable creature among other vulnerable creatures. The deeper we move into human history, the less useful it becomes to imagine safety as a stable background condition. Modern people often treat safety as something quiet and invisible. When it is present, it disappears from thought. A wall stands, a door locks, a window closes. A familiar room holds the same shape through the night, and the body is allowed to believe that sleep is simply what happens next. But that arrangement is historically unusual. For most of the human story, safety was less like a permanent structure and more like a temporary achievement made from place, timing, group presence, shelter, fire, and habit, then altered again by darkness, weather, movement, and chance. That does not mean human life was pure instability. It means protection was often partial rather than absolute. A night could be good enough for rest without becoming fully secure in the modern sense. This distinction is important because it prevents the title from becoming exaggerated. To say humans slept without safety is not to say they slept without any protection at all. It is to say that the conditions surrounding human sleep were rarely total, sealed, or guaranteed for most of our existence as a species. At the beginning of human life, survival depended on using landscapes, reading seasons, staying near others, and adjusting constantly to environments that could not be fully controlled. Sleep entered that reality, not a separate one. It belonged to the same unfinished world as hunger, cold, reproduction, childcare, movement, and injury. So when night came, human beings did not step out of the living environment into a perfectly defended room. They remained inside the same broad ecological field, only now with less vision, less mobility, and a body moving toward unconsciousness. That older form of sleep was likely shaped by continuity with the world, not separation from it. The night air was still air from outside. The ground was still part of the landscape. Sound still crossed the boundary between sleeper and surroundings. Other humans nearby were not background details, but part of the conditions that made rest possible at all. Near the origin point of our species, the problem of sleep was therefore never only about the individual body. It was also about how much protection a place, a group, or a moment could provide before complete control became impossible. This is one reason modern sleep can hide the past so effectively. A mattress, a roof, temperature control, indoor light, soft materials, and private rooms make sleep look natural in its safest form. They make it easy to forget that rest once took place in contact with a far more open world. Yet, if those protective layers are historically recent, then the long human baseline was not enclosed sleep, but exposed sleep managed as well as possible. That older baseline may explain why the title sounds strange at first, and then slowly begins to feel almost obvious. Humans did not evolve under nighttime conditions defined by certainty. They evolved under nighttime conditions defined by enough shelter, enough warmth, enough nearness to others, enough temporary advantage to let the body risk shutting down for a while. Safety in that sense was rarely a finished possession. It was a thin margin, and sleep had to fit inside that margin. Once this becomes visible, the question of the video changes shape. It stops being a dramatic claim about ancient fear and becomes a quieter historical observation. The human body that sleeps today in layered protection is descended from bodies that often had much less of it. For most of human history, sleep was not placed at the end of safety. It was placed inside uncertainty and made possible anyway. That may be the most important starting point of all, because everything that follows in the long history of human nights begins there. Not with perfect refuge, but with a body that needed to rest before the world was ever ready to promise it peace. Even in the safest modern bedroom, the body does not become a stone. It remains alive to interruption. A slight sound can travel through sleep. A change in temperature can shift posture without fully waking the mind. An unfamiliar place can make rest feel thinner, lighter, or slower to arrive. These are small and ordinary experiences, but they reveal something important. Human sleep is never a complete disappearance from the world. It is a changed relationship with the world. Awareness narrows, muscles release, and the mind passes through its own internal rhythms. Yet the sleeper is still a living animal whose body remains connected to sound, touch, warmth, pressure, and nearness. This matters because the title of the video does not depend only on the outside dangers of ancient life. It also depends on the kind of body humans have always had. Near the beginning of our species, that body was already modern in its essential structure. It still needed sleep for restoration, memory, regulation, and survival. But it also still had the same problem it has now. Sleep lowers immediate control. The body does not stop being vulnerable when sleep begins. It simply cannot avoid sleep forever. That is the deeper tension. A human being cannot permanently choose alertness over rest, because exhaustion itself becomes dangerous. Yet the moment rest begins, some forms of watchfulness weaken. So the human body is never solving the night in a final way. It is negotiating with it. In the long human past, before built environments separated sleepers from cold air, rough ground, insects, passing animals, and uncertain sound, that negotiation was likely more visible than it is today. The body could not withdraw into a fully insulated private space, because such spaces were rare or non-existent for most of human history. Sleep therefore remained closer to the edge of the environment. That edge is important. It means the sleeping body was not resting beyond the world, but within it, still subject to changing conditions that no closed room had yet erased. This does not require any exaggerated claim about ancient sleep patterns. We do not need to say that early humans were always half awake or that they never slept deeply. The evidence does not allow such certainty. What we can say more carefully is that the body humans carried into the prehistoric night was a body that sleeps by surrendering some control while still depending on enough sensitivity to survive until morning. That balance would have mattered even more near the starting point of human life, when groups lived in direct relation to weather, darkness, fire, other humans, and the wider animal world. One reason modern people often misunderstand ancient sleep is that we imagine the body as either on or off awake and guarding, or asleep and absent. But sleep is not pure absence. It is full of transitions, adjustments, and thresholds. The body rolls, startles, warms itself, responds to pressure, sometimes rises quickly into alertness. These are not modern inventions. They belong to human biology itself. So when we ask why most of human history slept without safety, part of the answer begins here. Humans did not evolve with a sleep system built for total disconnection from uncertainty. They evolved with a sleep system that had to function in the presence of uncertainty. That is a quieter and more powerful thought. The body did not wait for the world to become safe enough for perfect surrender. It learned to rest in a world where surrender had limits. Somewhere close to the origin of human life, that may have been one of the central facts of every night. Sleep arrived, but the body never became irrelevant to danger just because the eyes had closed. A waking human can scan distance, turn quickly, change direction, adjust posture, and decide what deserves attention. A sleeping human can do much less of that. This is not a flaw in the body. It is part of what sleep is. Rest requires a reduction in voluntary control. And that reduction is exactly what makes sleep restorative while also making it risky. The same organism that needs time away from continuous effort cannot defend itself in the same way during that time. For most of the human story, this biological fact would have mattered every night because sleep did not take place inside the heavily controlled conditions many people now take for granted. Near the beginning of our species, human beings already had the same basic bodily dilemma. They needed deep physical restoration, but they could not get it by stepping outside the natural world into total protection. They had to pass through the vulnerable state of sleep while still belonging to a changing environment. That simple reality may explain why safety in human sleep was never just an individual achievement. The body alone cannot solve the problem. No person can remain fully aware and fully restored at once. If a sleeper is to survive in less protected conditions, some of the burden must be shifted outward into place: timing, habit, fire, shelter, and above all, other humans nearby. This is one reason the modern ideal of sleep as a solitary private performance can be misleading when applied to deep history. The older human body was still a body that weakened its outward command of the world when sleep came. So whatever safety existed around it was likely not created by isolation, but by arrangement. The body's limits made social and environmental support more important, not less. Even now, human sleep still carries signs of that older arrangement. A person often rests differently in a familiar place than in an unfamiliar one. A repeated sound may fade into the background, while an unexpected sound cuts through it once. The body can stay asleep through some forms of continuity, but react quickly to disruption. These are modest observations from ordinary life, yet they help us avoid a major mistake. Ancient sleep should not be imagined as either peaceful modern sleep in a primitive setting, or non-stop terror with no rest at all. More likely, it occupied a shifting middle ground shaped by what the body can and cannot do. Humans can sleep under imperfect conditions, but not without cost, adjustment, and dependence on circumstances beyond the self. That would have been especially true near the origin point of human history, when the human body had not changed into a different kind of sleeper, but the world around it remained far less buffered. The body still heard, felt, startled, rolled, woke, settled, and woke again. It still carried the same ancient problem into every night: how to let go enough to recover, but not so completely that recovery became fatal. In that sense, the body never stops guarding because it never becomes free of its own exposure. It cannot preserve full alertness through sleep, but neither can it behave as though the outside world has ceased to matter. This is not a dramatic contradiction. It is a biological one. The body must enter a state that reduces action while remaining a body that lives among pressure, temperature, sound, movement, and other organisms. So when we say that most of human history slept without safety, we are also saying something very specific about the human organism. We are saying that the body humans inherited did not evolve under nightly conditions of complete insulation. It evolved under conditions where rest had to occur before absolute security existed and where the sleeper remained, in every age, a creature that could never entirely stop belonging to the world outside the skin. The modern mind is often tempted to imagine that a sleeping body, once comfortable enough, simply drops out of the world. But comfort is not the same thing as disconnection. A blanket can soften cold. A wall can block wind. A familiar room can reduce surprise. Yet none of these remove the deeper biological truth that sleep changes the body's powers without cancelling the world around it. The sleeper still lies inside gravity, temperature, contact, smell, sound, and the possible arrival of disturbance. That has always been true, and it becomes more revealing when we turn back toward the beginning of human life, where the body was far less surrounded by artificial layers of protection. Near that beginning, the human organism already had to perform the same basic act it performs now. It had to pass from waking control into reduced control and then, if all went well, return again. But the difference was that this passage happened much closer to the open conditions of the earth. The body did not sleep above the ground in specially designed frames, under tightly sealed roofs, inside rooms whose air and temperature could be controlled in advance. It slept in settings where the limits of the body were more exposed and therefore more consequential. A small change in the environment would have mattered more because fewer barriers stood between the sleeper and the world. This does not mean early humans were always on the edge of catastrophe. It means the body's ordinary vulnerability remained more visible. Today, many people experience sleep as a private event inside a managed interior. In the longer human past, sleep was likely less private, less separated, and less able to pretend that the body had become unreachable. To understand the title of this video, that point is essential. Humans did not spend most of their history sleeping inside the fantasy of complete nighttime protection, because the material conditions that support such a fantasy are historically recent. For much of our existence, the body at night was still a body sharing space with others, resting near sounds that had not been silenced, on surfaces not fully shaped for rest, under conditions not guaranteed to remain stable until dawn. The body could sleep there because it had to, but it could not sleep there as though exposure had disappeared. That may be why even modern sleep still contains echoes of negotiation rather than absolute surrender. People settle more easily in some places than in others. They respond differently to familiar sounds than to unfamiliar ones. They may sleep through one kind of continuity and wake to one small sign of change. These are not proofs of prehistoric life in a strict sense, but they do fit the deeper logic of a body that never evolved in perfect separation from the night. Somewhere close to the origin of our species, sleep was already a remarkable compromise. The body needed to restore itself, yet it could only do so by entering a state that reduced its immediate command over the environment. Safety then could never have come entirely from inside the sleeper. It had to be borrowed from nearness, routine, fire, place, shelter, and the quiet cooperation of other human bodies nearby. Once this becomes clear, the human story of unsafe sleep stops sounding like an exaggerated claim and starts sounding like a long condition of life. The body was never designed for total nighttime independence. It was designed to endure the night imperfectly in relation to others and to the world around it. That is the deeper meaning of saying the body never stops guarding. It does not mean the body remains fully awake in secret. It means sleep itself has always been shaped by the fact that human beings rest as exposed creatures first, and protected sleepers only much later in history. Night is easy to misunderstand when seen from the modern world. Electric light has trained many people to imagine darkness as simple absence, a blank interval between the useful hours of day and the private stillness of sleep. But for most of human history, night was not empty. It was full of information, though much of that information arrived in forms the eye could no longer handle. When the light dropped, the world did not become inactive. It became harder to read. Sound carried differently. Distance changed its meaning. Shapes lost their certainty. The edge of the group became less visible. The limits of shelter mattered more. A place that felt manageable at dusk could feel different after full dark. Not because the landscape itself had become new, but because the body's access to it had narrowed. This matters near the beginning of human history, because early humans did not leave the natural world behind at sunset. They remained inside it, only now with reduced vision and greater dependence on other senses, memory, routine, and nearness to others. In that setting, darkness was not a quiet backdrop to sleep. It was one of the main conditions that made sleep uncertain. To say that night was not empty is not to turn the prehistoric dark into a theater of constant drama. It is to notice that in no light, many ordinary things become harder to judge. A rustle may be nothing important, but it still asks for interpretation. A shift in wind may carry scent differently. The sounds of insects, distant animals, moving people, or a changing fire can merge into a field of signals that must be lived with, even when they cannot all be understood. For a species whose history began in outdoor and partly sheltered environments, the night was therefore thick with unresolved meaning. The body did not receive a clean message that all was calm. More often, it likely received a moving mixture of continuity and uncertainty. That is one reason modern safe sleep is so historically unusual. Today, many sleepers lie in rooms designed to reduce how much of the night reaches them. Light is controlled, doors create boundaries, outside sounds are softened. Ground becomes floor, floor becomes bed, and bed becomes a protected platform. But if we move back toward the early human condition, those layers begin to fall away. Then night returns as a more immediate presence. Darkness no longer means privacy. It means limited knowledge. It means that much of the world is still there, but no longer fully available to sight. For beings who began their history under those conditions, sleep could not simply be a withdrawal into nothingness. It had to take place while the world remained active beyond the edge of visibility. This may help explain why human sleep is so deeply tied to context. The body is not only responding to internal fatigue, it is also responding to how readable the environment feels. Near the origin point of our species, the environment after dark would often have been less readable, less controllable, and more dependent on shared familiarity. A known place with known companions and known rhythms was not the same as an unknown place after sundown. The dark did not erase those differences. It sharpened them. This is why the title of the video reaches beyond walls and weapons and enters perception itself. Humans slept without safety, partly because they slept in a world where darkness did not remove reality, but only removed clarity. The night was still filled with weather, ground, sound, temperature, other humans, and other animals. It still demanded interpretation, even when the body was least equipped to provide it. Somewhere near the starting point of human life, this may have been one of the most basic truths of every evening. When the sun went down, the world did not become empty enough for easy surrender. It became harder to know, and the body had to sleep there anyway. In darkness, the human world does not disappear. It only loses its edges. That may be one of the most important differences between day and night near the beginning of our species. During the day, distance can often be judged before contact. The eye works ahead of the body. It marks the path, notices movement, separates one object from another, and gives warning before closeness becomes danger. At night, much of that advantage weakens. The world becomes harder to divide into harmless and harmful, familiar and unfamiliar, stable and changing. A place that could be read in daylight becomes a place that must be sensed more indirectly through memory, sound, smell, touch, and the behavior of others nearby. For most of human history, this would have mattered deeply, because sleep did not happen after the environment had been fully mastered. It happened inside environments whose meanings changed after dark. That shift alone could make the night less secure, even without dramatic events. A faint movement in low light can feel larger because detail is missing. A known sound can remain tolerable because it fits expectations, while a new sound becomes difficult to ignore because it arrives without context. The body does not need proof of disaster to lose ease. It only needs uncertainty. That is why darkness should not be understood as empty space. It is better understood as reduced certainty. And reduced certainty changes what sleep means. Near the origin point of human life, people were not sleeping inside bright systems of artificial separation. They were sleeping in relation to open air, changing temperature, uneven sound, variable shelter, and the close presence of other human bodies. Under those conditions, darkness would not simply have hidden danger. It would have hidden distinctions. The body may hear something without seeing its source. It may feel a shift in air before knowing what caused it. It may notice that the group around it is no longer arranged in quite the same way. None of this requires panic. It only requires a world in which the limits of knowledge arrive earlier than the limits of reality. This is one reason safe modern sleep feels so different from older human sleep. Today, many people pass the night inside environments that reduce uncertainty by design. Light can be restored instantly. Familiar walls define boundaries. Windows turn outside movement into something distant. The unknown remains, but it has been pushed farther away from the sleeping body. In the longer human past, the distance was often smaller. The sleeper and the night remained more directly connected. Darkness therefore carried not just fear in the emotional sense, but a practical loss of information. The body could not know as much, or as clearly, and yet the body still had to rest. This may be one of the coldest aspects of the human story. Sleep had to occur under the very condition that made interpretation weaker. Near the beginning of our species, the body did not receive a separate safe world for nighttime use. It inherited one world seen differently by day and by night, and it had to survive in both. The night narrowed what could be known, but it did not narrow what could happen. That imbalance may have shaped human rest more deeply than we often notice. It helps explain why proximity, routine, familiarity, and the stable presence of others would have mattered so much. In darkness, these were not luxuries. They were among the few ways uncertainty could be reduced without ever being removed. So when we say that night was never empty, we are really saying something larger. We are saying that for most of human history, sleep took place not in silence or blankness, but in a world that remained present while becoming harder to read. The darkness did not create a second universe. It left humans inside the same universe with less clarity and asked the body to surrender there. Anyway, the modern sleeper often defeats the night before sleep even begins. A switch is pressed, a curtain is drawn, a door is closed, a familiar space is arranged into softness and order, and darkness becomes something measured and limited. It enters the room only in a controlled way. This can make it difficult to imagine what darkness was for most of human history, because the modern mind treats it as an absence that can be managed, rather than a condition that reshapes perception. But near the beginning of human life, darkness was not something placed neatly around sleep. It was part of the world itself, and the body had to enter rest while still surrounded by it. That difference may sound small, yet it changes everything. When darkness cannot be cleanly separated from the sleeping place, the boundary between shelter and outside becomes thinner. Sound matters more. The arrangement of bodies matters more. The persistence of fire matters more. The memory of terrain matters more. A sleeper is not only asking whether danger is present. A sleeper is also living inside reduced access to knowledge. This is the deeper reason night could make sleep feel unsafe, even when nothing dramatic occurred. The issue was not only what might be out there. The issue was how little could be confirmed once sight lost its reach. A known environment could still help. Familiarity mattered. Repeated sounds, expected smells, and the steady presence of others could all soften uncertainty, but they did not erase the condition itself. Darkness still changed the terms under which the body met the world, and for most of human history, that was not an occasional discomfort. It was the normal background of sleep. This is why the history of unsafe sleep is not only about predators, conflict, weather, or exposure in the obvious sense. It is also about the more basic fact that human beings spent most of their existence trying to rest in a world that became less legible after sunset. The body may be tired enough to sleep, but tiredness does not restore lost clarity. It only makes surrender necessary. Somewhere close to the origin of our species, that may have been one of the quiet rules of every night. The world remained there in full, while the body's ability to read it had already begun to fade. Seen this way, safety was never just the absence of attack. It was the degree to which uncertainty could be reduced before sleep took over. A little firelight, known companions, a sheltered position, and repeated habit could all narrow uncertainty, but not remove it. The night was still larger than whatever small circle of order a human group could build within it. That thought brings the first movement of this video to its real conclusion. Humans did not spend most of their history sleeping in a world that had become quiet, empty, and fully understandable. They slept in a world that stayed present while becoming harder to know. The dark did not cancel reality. It thickened it. It drew more of life beyond the edge of certainty, then asked the body to lie down anyway. If sleep in the modern sense often feels like release, sleep across most of human history may have felt more like a managed descent, never entirely free from the unfinished world around it. And that is why the title is not simply about fear. It is about a long human condition in which rest had to happen before the night could ever be made truly safe. For most modern people, the ground feels neutral because it has already been transformed. It lies under houses, under floors, under beds, under layers of dryness, insulation, and control. It supports sleep without seeming to shape it. But for most of human history, the ground was not a hidden base beneath safety. It was part of the problem itself. To sleep on or near the ground was to remain in direct contact with a surface that carried cold, moisture, unevenness, smell, insects, and the traces of whatever else had recently occupied the place. Near the beginning of human life, this mattered because the sleeping body did not rest at a clean distance from the earth. It rested close to it, often with only limited separation. That alone changes the meaning of nighttime safety. A body sleeping near the ground is not only exposed to what approaches from farther away, It is also exposed to what rises from underneath and surrounds it at the smallest scale. Temperature can drain into the body through contact. Dampness can remain long after the air feels calm. A slight slope can alter posture for hours. Small organisms need no dramatic entrance because they already belong to the surface itself. None of this requires a scene of crisis. It only requires a world in which the place of rest is not fully cleaned before the body lies down. This is why the ground should not be imagined as a simple natural bed. It is true that human beings spent most of their existence sleeping much closer to the earth than most people do now. But closeness is not the same as safety. The earth can support a body while also making recovery harder. Hardness affects pressure. Unevenness changes how the body settles. Cold from below behaves differently from cold moving through open air. The sleeper may lose warmth poorly if the surface beneath remains colder than the body can easily tolerate. Near the origin point of our species, before raised sleeping platforms, thick manufactured bedding, sealed floors, or reliable indoor separation became common, these would not have been minor details. They would have shaped the quality and security of sleep itself. What matters here is not to romanticize hardship or exaggerate certainty. We cannot reconstruct every prehistoric sleeping arrangement. Some groups likely used plant matter, skins, prepared ground, sheltered spots, or other forms of local adaptation. The archaeological record even shows evidence that people sometimes arranged sleeping surfaces with care. But care is not the same thing as full protection. Even a chosen place on the ground remains part of the living landscape. It can be improved but rarely erased. That is the deeper point. For most of human history, sleep did not float above the earth in protected stability. It pressed against it. The ground remained an active condition of rest, not a silent foundation beneath it. This may be one reason modern sleep feels so materially different from older human sleep. A raised bed does more than provide softness. It creates separation. It lifts the body away from cold transfer, crawling life, pool dampness, roughness, and the immediate signals of the surface. That separation is easy to forget, because it now feels ordinary. But if we move back toward the early human condition, the body loses the distance and returns to a more direct relation with the earth. Then the title of the video becomes clearer in a new way. Humans slept without safety, not only because the night around them was uncertain, but because even the surface beneath them could not be assumed to be harmless. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, rest likely depended not on finding perfect ground, but on finding ground that was merely good enough for one more night. That is a colder image of human sleep, and perhaps a more accurate one. The body lay down not on a neutral surface prepared by civilization, but on a piece of earth that could only ever be partly negotiated, never fully tamed. The ground does not behave the same way toward a sleeping body as it does toward a walking one. By day, a rough surface can simply be crossed. A damp patch can be avoided. A small slope can be adjusted to in motion. But at night, when the body is meant to remain still for long stretches, those same qualities change their meaning. What is tolerable for a few minutes while standing can become draining over hours when lying down. This is one reason the earth itself mattered so much in the long history of human sleep. Near the beginning of our species, rest did not occur above the landscape in carefully designed suspension. It occurred within the landscape, where the body had to work with whatever the surface allowed. Hardness, pressure, cold, dampness, and instability were not background details. They were part of the conditions, which sleep either held or broke apart. Even now, a person can feel how strongly a surface affects rest. A bed that is too hard, too soft, too cold, too uneven, or too unfamiliar can alter how the body settles, how often posture changes, and how easily sleep deepens. That simple truth becomes more revealing when we remove the protective technologies of modern sleep and imagine the older human condition more carefully. A body close to the ground is not only closer to the earth in a poetic sense, it is more directly exposed to the earth as a physical system. Heat can move away, moisture can remain trapped near contact points, pressure can accumulate in places that would otherwise be relieved by softer or better shaped support over the course of a night. That means the body is not merely resting in nature, it is constantly being shaped by it. For most of human history, this would have mattered because the human species began without stable floors, padded bedding, elevated frames, or reliable control over the surface of sleep. There may have been careful site choice, prepared areas, gathered plant matter, skins, or local sleeping arrangements that improved comfort and reduced exposure. Archaeology and ethnographic evidence both suggest that humans often modified their sleeping places where possible. But again, modification is not immunity. A chosen patch of ground can still remain cold from below, wet in ways the eye missed, uneven in ways the body only discovers later, or alive with small forms of life that share the same terrain. This is where the title becomes more material and less abstract. Unsafe sleep was not only about what might arrive from the darkness beyond the sleeper. It was also about what the sleeper could not escape beneath the body itself. A human lying on the ground remains in contact with a world that does not stop acting simply because sleep has begun. The surface still conducts temperature. It still holds traces of weather. It still belongs to insects, roots, dust, and texture. Somewhere near the origin of human life, this may have been one of the most ordinary forms of vulnerability, so constant that it needed no drama. The body lay down and accepted a place that would support it imperfectly. That imperfection may have helped shape the very rhythm of ancient nights. The sleeper shifts, curls, turns, pulls closer to warmth, seeks a drier patch, presses against another body, or uses what little material is available to create a margin between flesh and earth. These small acts do not prove a single prehistoric pattern, but they fit a larger human logic. Sleep on the ground was rarely the same as peace with the ground. It was an accommodation. And for most of human history, accommodation may have been the closest thing available to safety. The earth beneath the sleeper was never just a passive platform. It remained an active presence, continuously reminding the body that rest had to happen not above the world, but still inside it. What modern sleep often hides is not just the history of danger, but the history of contact. A raised bed, a floor, a dry room, and layers of manufactured material allow the body to forget how much the surface beneath it matters. The sleeper is lifted away from the earth and begins to experience rest as something almost detached from place. But for most of human history, that detachment did not exist. Humans slept much closer to the ground, and that meant they slept much closer to a world that could not be fully softened, cleaned, dried, or made stable. The ground was not simply where sleep happened. It was one of the reasons sleep remained uncertain. Near the beginning of our species, the body did not settle into rest inside a carefully engineered zone made to preserve warmth, reduce pressure, and separate flesh from moisture and crawling life. It settled into whatever degree of separation a group could temporarily create. That might include chosen terrain, gathered plant matter, skins, ash, repeated sleeping places, or local shelter. Human beings were not passive in the face of the environment. They likely worked constantly to improve their chances, including at night. But the important distinction remains. Improvement is not the same as control. However carefully a sleeping place was prepared, the body still remained close to the earth and the earth remained active. Cold could rise through the surface. Dampness could stay hidden until long contact revealed it. Irregular pressure could slowly change how the body rested. Tiny organisms needed no breach because the sleeping place was already part of their habitat too. This older condition helps explain why sleeping safely was never just about being tired enough to fall asleep. It was also about whether the body could maintain enough warmth, dryness, and relative stillness to stay asleep in the first place. That is a very different picture from the modern idea that sleep naturally unfolds once the mind relaxes. For most of the human story, the success of sleep likely depended as much on managing the physical ground as on any inward sense of ease. Near the origin point of human life, the body may have learned night after night that rest was possible only through imperfect negotiation with the surface below. A place could be better than another place. It could be more sheltered, more familiar, less damp, less exposed, more suitable for lying close together. But it was rarely transformed into a neutral sleeping technology. It remained Earth first, sleeping place second. Once that becomes clear, the title of this video gains another layer. Humans slept without safety. Not only because darkness limited knowledge, and because the body itself became vulnerable, but because even the contact point between body and world remained unstable. The sleeper could not simply withdraw from the landscape stayed in immediate touch. This may be one reason so many later developments in human life matter more than they first appear. The making of indoor floors, raised sleeping spaces, thicker bedding, enclosed rooms, and dry interiors was not merely a story of comfort. It was a long process of reducing contact with an earth that had always shaped sleep from below. Modern people often inherit the result without noticing the achievement. They think of a bed as softness, Historically, it is also distance. It is a way of refusing direct negotiation with the ground. That refusal is very recent when measured against the full span of human existence. For most of that span, people rested in contact with a surface that could support them and trouble them at the same time. The body closed its eyes not on a neutral foundation, but on a piece of the world that never stopped acting on it. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, that may have been one of the quietest and most constant truths of the night. Sleep did not begin above the earth, but pressed close against it, where safety was always partial and rest was always earned. For most modern sleepers, other people are often treated as a disturbance to rest. A body beside us can shift the mattress, change the temperature, breathe too loudly, wake too early, or take up too much space. Privacy now feels so normal that sleep is often imagined as most complete when it is solitary. But this modern expectation becomes harder to project backward the closer we move toward the beginning of human life. For most of human history, other humans were not simply optional company at night. They were likely part of the condition that made sleep possible at all. This is not because human beings always preferred closeness in some emotional sense. And it is not because every ancient group slept in the same arrangement. It is because the human body, already vulnerable in sleep, could borrow a form of protection from nearness that it could not generate alone. A sleeping person cannot watch in every direction, maintain warmth as efficiently in isolation, or manage every interruption without cost. But a group changes the problem. Many bodies in one place alter temperature, sound, rhythm, and awareness. They create continuity. They reduce the chances that one sleeper is facing the entire night alone. Near the origin of our species, that may have mattered more than most modern people realize. Human beings did not begin their history as isolated nighttime units, each going into a separate protected chamber. They began in groups whose survival depended heavily on coordination, shared space, and repeated proximity. That logic likely did not end at sunset. If anything, night may have intensified it. In darkness, when vision narrows and the body yields some control, the presence of familiar others becomes more than social background. It becomes part of the sleeping environment itself. A known body nearby can mean shared warmth, shared sound, shared reaction, shared continuity through the night. Even silence changes when it is shared. The sleeper no longer rests against emptiness, but against the steady signs of others still being there. This should not be romanticized. Sleeping near others can also mean more movement, more noise, more interruption, and less personal space. But in the older human world, the question was not whether shared sleep was perfectly comfortable. The question was whether it made unsafe sleep more survivable. In many conditions, it likely did. The group could not remove darkness, hard ground, or uncertainty. Yet it could reduce exposure by turning one vulnerable body into part of a cluster of bodies, one set of senses into many, one fragile point into a thicker human presence. This is one reason the title of the video may point not only toward danger, but toward dependence. Humans slept without safety, partly because safety was often not an individual possession. It was distributed across the group. Near the beginning of human history, sleep may have relied less on personal control and more on collective arrangement. Where people lay, how close they stayed, who remained near children, who occupied the edge of a sleeping area, how fire was maintained, how familiarity reduced surprise, all of these may have mattered more than any single sleeper's preferences. Modern sleep often gives the impression that the ideal night is the most private one. The longer human story suggests something else. It suggests that rest emerged within shared human space long before it became a solitary private experience. Somewhere near the starting point of our species, the body may have learned one of its deepest nighttime lessons from this condition. To sleep was not to withdraw completely from other humans. It was to depend on them differently. In a world where the night could not be fully controlled, the nearness of others may have been one of the few forms of safety that the body could actually feel before morning arrived. A lone sleeper must solve the night with only one body. That body must hold its own warmth, absorb every unfamiliar sound alone, and move between rest and alertness without help. A group changes that equation even before any deliberate action is taken. Bodies gathered in one place change temperature, reduce the psychological force of open space, create familiar sound, and make interruption less isolating. For most of human history, this may have been one of the most basic ways human beings reduced the danger of sleep without ever eliminating it. Near the beginning of our species, Safety at night was unlikely to be something stored in walls or locks. It was more likely built from nearness, repeated arrangement, memory of place, and the stabilizing effect of familiar others. This does not mean every sleeping group was calm or perfectly ordered. Shared sleep brings its own problems. Someone shifts position, a child cries, a sick person coughs, one person rises, another returns. Space becomes crowded, rest becomes uneven. But those disturbances should not be confused with failure. In a less protected world, some interruption may have been the price of not being alone. The modern sleeper often imagines uninterrupted privacy as the natural ideal, because modern architecture makes that ideal possible. Yet, if we move back toward the longer human baseline, sleep may have depended less on uninterrupted stillness and more on surviving the night within a shared human field. That shared field mattered because one sleeper's vulnerability could be partly buffered by the presence of others. Sound itself changes in this setting. A completely solitary night leaves every unexpected noise standing out against emptiness. A shared sleeping place produces continuity breathing, shifting, low movement, the quiet evidence that the group remains present. Familiar continuity can make uncertainty easier to carry, not because the world outside disappears, but because the sleeper is not facing it as a singular exposed point. This is one reason ancient sleep was likely more social in a practical sense than modern people first assume. The body's ability to rest was tied not only to fatigue or darkness, but to whether the surrounding human arrangement made surrender less costly. Near the origin point of human life, children would not have been an exception to this pattern. They would have made it even more necessary. The needs of infants, the vulnerability of the young, and the dependence of mothers on proximity would all have put sleep toward shared space rather than away from it. Older individuals, injured bodies, or those weakened by illness would have done the same. In this sense, human sleep was shaped not by one abstract adult sleeper, but by mixed groups with unequal bodies and unequal needs. That makes the title of the video more specific. Humans slept without safety, partly because safety at night had to be created socially and imperfectly, again and again, under conditions that never allowed for control. The group could reduce risk, but it could not transform night into a modern protected interior. It could only make sleep more possible. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, that may have been enough. The body did not need perfect certainty to close its eyes. It needed a margin, however thin. Shared sleep may have been one of the oldest ways humans built that margin, not by removing darkness, not by ending exposure, but by making one vulnerable sleep a part of a larger living presence that carried the night together. In that older world, the closeness of others was not simply companionship. It was one of the structures from which sleep itself borrowed its fragile stability. What modern sleep often treats as inconvenience, older human life may have treated as protection. Another body nearby could interrupt rest, but it could also make rest possible. This is the point where the history of unsafe sleep becomes inseparable from the history of human social life. For most of our existence, people likely did not sleep as isolated individuals who happened to belong to a group by day. They slept as members of a group whose nighttime arrangement mattered because the body alone could not create safety while asleep. Near the beginning of our species, rest was not just a private biological event. It was a collective condition shaped by proximity, familiarity, and the uneven needs of different human bodies. This does not mean ancient people consciously understood sleep in those terms. We do not need to assign modern theories to them. It is enough to see that the practical reality of sleep would have pushed human beings toward one another. Infants required constant closeness. Children could not be left the night alone. Older bodies and weakened bodies likely needed nearness for warmth, assistance, and immediate response. Adults in full strength still slept more vulnerably than they lived by day. Under those conditions, sleeping near others was not merely custom. It was one of the few available ways to make the night less costly. The group did not create perfect peace. It created a thicker margin against uncertainty. That margin may have been built from many small things. Warmth held longer in shared space. Familiar breathing and movement could reduce the force of silence. An unexpected sound no longer reached one isolated sleeper, but reached many bodies at once. A person waking briefly was still waking within human presence, not into emptiness. None of these conditions removed the unfinished world outside. Darkness remained. Weather remained. The ground remained imperfect. Animals, insects, strangers, and chance all remained possible. But the group altered how that world was encountered. It meant the sleeper did not pass through the night as a single exposed point. The body borrowed some of its safety from the continued existence of other bodies close by. This may be one of the oldest truths hidden inside human sleep. Even now, many people feel the difference between a familiar shared space and an unfamiliar solitary one, though modern life often teaches them to value the second more highly. Historically, however, the first may have been closer to the human baseline. Sleep was not born in privacy. It was born in dependence, repetition, and shared vulnerability. Somewhere near the origin of human history, the body may have learned that rest was not secured by controlling the whole environment, because the whole environment could not be controlled. It was secured by reducing exposure through arrangement, and human arrangement was among the strongest tools available. Once we see this, the title of the video takes on a fuller meaning. Humans slept without safety, not because they had no strategies, but because their strategies could only create partial protection. The nearness of others was one of those strategies, and perhaps one of the most important. It did not turn night into modern safety. It turned night into something survivable enough that sleep could continue. That is a quieter, more human image than the usual extremes of comfort or terror. It suggests that across most of human history, rest was not an escape from dependence. It was one of the deepest forms of dependence the species ever knew. The sleeper lay down not protected from other humans, but protected partly by them, within a fragile circle of shared presence that held just long enough for another night to pass. Fire changed the human night so deeply that it is tempting to treat it as the moment sleep finally became safe. A circle of light pushes back darkness, makes familiar faces visible, offers warmth, and may discourage some animals from coming too near. In the long human story, these are not small advantages. They may have altered the night more than almost any other tool early humans had. Yet it would be a mistake to imagine that once fire entered human life, the problem of unsafe sleep was solved. Fire did not remove the night. It only changed one part of the body's relationship to it. Near the beginning of our species, if fire was present and maintained, it could create a temporary center of order in a world that otherwise remained open, cold, and difficult to read after dark. But a center is not the same as a sealed refuge. The light of a fire reaches only so far. Beyond that circle, the dark remains. Its uncertainty remains. Its sounds remain. Even within the lighted space, safety is still conditional. Fire needs fuel. It needs tending. It changes in strength. It throws shifting shadows that can make movement more visible and less readable at the same time. Smoke may help in some contexts and trouble the body in others. Warmth can ease one form of discomfort while never becoming a total barrier against everything the night still contains. This is the key point. Fire improved the human night, but it did not finish it. It gave early humans a powerful way to reduce some kinds of exposure, especially cold and immediate darkness nearby. Yet it could not turn the sleeping place into a modern interior. The ground beneath the body still mattered. The limits of shelter still mattered. Other living things still existed beyond the light. The body still became vulnerable when sleep took over. Near the origin point of human history, fire may therefore be understood not as the invention of nighttime safety, but as the invention of a margin. It made sleep more possible, more stable, more extended perhaps, but still within a world where complete control remained out of reach. This distinction matters because modern people often inherit fire in its most domesticated form. It comes through rules, stoves, switches, hidden systems, and regulated heat. It feels reliable, contained, and obedient. Early fire was nothing like that. It was immediate, visible, consuming, unstable, and dependent on human attention. It could go low, it could go out, it could move with wind, it could demand labor before sleep, and even during the night. So the old relationship between fire and sleep was not simply one of comfort. It was one of management. Humans did not receive a permanently defended night. They built and rebuilt a local advantage against it. Somewhere near the beginning of human life, that local advantage may have changed the rhythm of evening itself. A group near a fire could gather, warm itself, maintain visibility within a small zone, and perhaps reduce some of the uncertainty that darkness imposed. But even then, sleep remained sleep. The body still had to surrender in stages. Someone might still need to wake. Someone might still notice that the warmth had thinned, that the sound outside the circle had changed, that the arrangement of bodies and shadows was no longer the same. Fire did not erase these conditions. It became part of the arrangement through which human beings lived with them. This is why the title of the video remains true even after fire enters the story. Humans slept without safety, not because they lacked all means of protection, but because their protections were partial, temporary, and constantly dependent on maintenance. Fire was among the greatest of those protections. It may have been one of the oldest ways humans shaped the night to fit the body's need for rest, but it did not turn the night into peace. It only made the long human compromise of sleep a little more possible. A fire changes more than temperature. It changes distance, attention, and the shape of human space. A sleeping place without fire belongs almost completely to the larger night. A sleeping place with fire creates a center, however small, where warmth gathers. Faces remain visible a little longer, and the dark no longer begins at the edge of the body itself. For most of human history, this would have mattered enormously. Near the beginning of our species, any reliable use of fire at night would have given human groups one of the few ways to alter the darkness rather than simply endure it. The body could settle closer to warmth. Familiar others could remain visible. The immediate ground could be chosen and arranged around a source of light. Some animals may have kept more distance. Some uncertainties may have become easier to bear. Yet all of these changes should be understood carefully. Fire reduced certain problems, but it also revealed how many problems still remained. Its protection was local, not total. Light from flame does not erase the night. It only creates a boundary between what can still be seen and what cannot. In that sense, fire does not end uncertainty. It sharpens its edge. The group can now see itself and the small area around it more clearly. But beyond that circle, the unknown begins again. The body may feel safer because the nearest darkness has moved outward, yet it has not disappeared. This is one reason fire should not be mistaken for a final solution. It is better understood as a fragile expansion of order into a world that remains larger than the order itself. Near the origin point of human life, that fragile expansion may have shaped sleep in subtle ways. A body resting near fire could borrow warmth that would otherwise be lost to cold air and cold ground. Familiar sounds around the fire might make the night more continuous and less abrupt. The group might remain more tightly arranged around a center, reducing the sense of exposure that open darkness creates. But fire also demanded human effort. Wood had to be found, carried, fed, and watched. Smoke could drift, sting, or thicken the air. Heat could fluctuate. A fire that burns low no longer gives the same light or comfort. A fire that is neglected can vanish into ash before morning. So the human relationship between fire and sleep was never simply passive. People did not just enjoy the fire and drift into perfectly protected rest. They depended on something alive, consuming, and unstable, something that improved the night only so long as it could be maintained. This matters because it keeps the title of the video honest. Humans slept without safety even after fire became part of their lives. Not because fire was weak, but because the world it acted on was still only partly transformed. The ground remained hard or damp beneath prepared sleeping places. The limits of shelter remained. Weather still mattered. The body still surrendered control during sleep. Other living creatures still occupied the landscape beyond the light. Fire may have made all of this more manageable, but it did not remove the deeper structure of exposure. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, sleep beside fire may have felt less like victory over the night and more like a negotiated pause within it. The flame held a small area together. It bought time. It widened the human margin against darkness. But it did not remove the old human condition of resting before the world had become fully safe. If anything, fire makes that condition easier to see. It shows how much labor and intelligence were required just to create a temporary island of warmth and visibility, and how narrow that island still remained against the much larger night around it. The history of fire is not the history of safety completed. It is the history of safety attempted. That difference matters because modern people often inherit the end result of controlled heat and light without feeling the uncertainty that once surrounded them. A lamp turns on. A room warms. The night recedes behind glass and walls. Fire now seems obedient, almost invisible in its modern forms. But near the beginning of human life, fire was never merely a convenience added to sleep. It was one of the few ways humans could push back against cold and darkness at all. And precisely for that reason, it reveals how incomplete their protection still was. If fire had truly solved the problem, the title of this video would begin to collapse here. Yet it does not collapse. It survives, because fire did not create a sealed, sleeping world. It created a temporary advantage inside an unsealed one. That temporary advantage was immense. It may have changed evening gathering, warmth, visibility, the arrangement of bodies, the perception of nearby space, and the general possibility of remaining in one place through the night. It likely helped make certain forms of rest more stable than they otherwise would have been. But none of this turned sleep into a guaranteed state. Fire could fail. Fuel could run low. Wind could change its behavior. Smoke could trouble the lungs and eyes. A flame could shrink into embers while the night remained long. Even when it burned well, it only transformed a limited circle. Outside that circle, the dark still held its full uncertainty. Inside it, the body still lay down on imperfect ground, still depended on others, still passed into reduced control. Fire improved the terms of sleep, but it did not change the nature of sleep itself. The sleeper remained vulnerable. This may be the most important lesson fire adds to the human story. It shows that early humans were not passive victims of the night, nor masters of it. They were active negotiators with it. They worked to shape the conditions of sleep, but the conditions they built were never final. Somewhere near the origin point of our species, the fire may have marked the difference between greater exposure and lesser exposure, not between danger and perfect peace. That is a quieter image, and likely a true one. A body near the flames could rest more fully perhaps, or at least more warmly, more socially, more visibly. Yet it still rested in a world that remained only partly transformed. The old human compromise continued. Sleep still came before complete safety had arrived. In this way, fire does not end the argument of the title. It deepens it. Humans slept without safety not because they lacked intelligence, cooperation, or tools, but because even their best tools could only carve out small and temporary pockets of protection within a much larger uncertainty. Fire was among the greatest of those tools. It may have given the human night a center for the first time, but a center is not the same as a fortress. It is a place from which vulnerability can be reduced, not erased. And perhaps that is why fire belongs so centrally in the long history of human sleep. It stands as one of the clearest signs that the species was always trying to make the night livable, even while knowing in the logic of the body, if not in words, that the night could never be fully brought under human control. The flame held, the group gathered, the ground was made a little more tolerable, and the body finally closed its eyes, not because the world had become safe, but because for one more night it had become safe enough. A shelter changes the night, but it does not automatically defeat it. This is easy to forget in the modern world, where shelter often means thick walls, stable roofs, sealed openings, controlled air, and a deep separation between body and landscape. For most of human history, shelter was usually a lesser thing. It could reduce exposure, but it rarely erased it. Near the beginning of human life, a protected sleeping place might mean a cave, a rock overhang, a windbreak, a temporary structure, a screened area, or a carefully chosen location that offered some advantage against cold, rain, visibility, or open approach. These were meaningful improvements. They could change whether the body held warmth, whether a fire remained useful, whether the group stayed together more easily, and whether the night pressed in from every direction at once. But shelter in this older sense should not be confused with full indoor safety. It was often partial, local, and dependent on conditions that could change. A roof may block rain without blocking cold air. A wall may reduce wind without sealing out sound. A cave may provide cover while still remaining damp, uneven, smoky, or shared with other forms of life. This is the central point. Shelter allowed certain kinds of exposure, but it did not remove the deeper vulnerability of sleep. The body still had to lie down. The ground still mattered. Darkness still began outside the limited protected zone. The group still depended on one another. Fire, if present, still needed care. For most of human history, shelter was not the end of the problem. It was one of the ways humans made the problem smaller. Near the origin point of our species, that distinction likely shaped the entire experience of nighttime rest. The body did not pass from wilderness into total enclosure. It passed into degrees of reduced exposure. Some places were better than others. Some were drier, warmer, more defensible, or more familiar. Some held heat better or turned the wind away. Some allowed bodies to cluster closer, keep infants nearer, place fire where it could matter more. But even a good shelter was still part of the world around it, not fully removed from it. Sound could enter, smell could enter, cold could enter, moisture could remain trapped, crawling life could remain present. Human beings could choose a better night, but rarely a perfect one. This is why the history of shelter is so important to the title of the video. Humans slept without safety, not because they lacked intelligence or adaptation, but because adaptation itself often worked by reducing exposure rather than removing it. Shelter belongs to that long human effort. It represents selection, memory, labor, and local knowledge. It shows that people were always trying to improve the conditions of sleep. Yet it also shows how difficult for safety really was. If the sleeping place still depends on the shape of stone, the direction of wind, the dryness of ground, the management of smoke, the closeness of others, and the behavior of the night outside, then the body remains inside a vulnerable system even while sheltered. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, this may have been the ordinary reality of rest. Sleep did not happen out in the open every night, and it did not happen in secure indoor certainty either. It happened in between. It happened where humans could gather enough cover to soften the night without ever fully mastering it. That older meaning of shelter is colder than the modern one. It does not promise peace. It promises only a narrower exposure, a smaller opening through which the night can still reach the sleeper. And for most of human history, that may have been all the body could ask for before finally giving in to sleep. A place to sleep becomes a shelter only when it changes what the night can do to the body. That change may be large or small. A roof can break rain. A wall can weaken wind. A narrow entrance can make approach more predictable. A familiar enclosure can gather warmth, hold smoke differently, and keep the group closer together. For most of human history, these were not minor improvements. Near the beginning of our species, they may have marked the difference between a night that could be endured and a night that could not. Yet the importance of shelter should not tempt us into imagining too much. Early shelters, whether natural or built, did not function like modern interiors. They were not sealed systems that removed weather, noise, dampness, and uncertainty from sleep. More often, they changed the balance. They narrowed exposure without ending it. This is why shelter matters so much in the story of unsafe sleep. It shows how human beings try to bend the environment in their favor, while also showing how incomplete that bending remained. A cave, for example, can offer cover and stability, but it can also hold cold air, moisture, uneven ground, smoke, and other living things. A temporary structure may reduce wind and define a shared space, yet still leave the body close to outdoor temperature shifts, insect life, and every sound beyond its thin boundary. Even a very good sleeping place, in the older human sense, remained tied to the wider landscape. It did not cut sleep free from the world. It only changed how directly the world touched the sleeper. This is the key distinction. Near the origin point of human life, people likely did not move each night between total exposure and total protection. They moved between worse conditions and better ones. A sheltered place might hold warmth more effectively when bodies slept close together. It might make fire more useful by protecting the flame from wind. It might make the night easier to read by giving the group a stable center and more predictable edges. These are real gains, but every gain still depended on materials, weather, terrain, and the continuing effort of human bodies to arrange themselves within the space. Shelter was not safety stored in advance. It was safety partly assembled, partly borrowed, and often fragile. That fragility would have mattered, especially because sleep itself reduced the body's control. A waking person can respond quickly to a shift in wind or a change in smoke. A sleeping person cannot respond in the same way. So even good shelter did not remove the need for group awareness, routine, and the constant human work of making an imperfect place good enough. This is one reason modern sleep can be misleading when used as a model for the past. Today, a room often functions as if protection has already been completed before the sleeper arrives. Historically, that completion was rare. The shelter around early human sleep was often part of the ongoing negotiation, not the end of it. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, the body may have known this in the most practical way possible. The difference between open ground and a protected place was real, but the protected place was still not a promise. It was still stone, plant material, hide, earth, wood, smoke, wind direction, body heat, and chance arranged into a temporary margin against the night. That margin could be meaningful without ever becoming absolute. So when we say humans slept without safety, shelter does not contradict the claim. It explains it. Shelter was one of the clearest human attempts to reduce vulnerability, and the fact that such attempts remained partial is exactly what makes the long history of sleep so revealing. Humans were always building lesser versions of safety long before they could build the stronger kind they now take for granted. Shelter did not end the long human problem of sleep. It gave that problem shape. This may be the clearest way to understand its place in the story. Modern people often think of shelter as the line between exposure and safety, as though once the body passes under a roof or behind a wall, the essential work has already been done. But across most of human history, shelter was rarely that final. It could reduce rain, redirect wind, gather warmth, and give the night more stable boundaries. Yet it usually remained open to cold, sound, dampness, smoke, insects, and the wider uncertainties of the landscape. Near the beginning of our species, a place of rest was valuable, not because it removed vulnerability, but because it made vulnerability narrower, more manageable, and more shared. That is a much older meaning of shelter than the one many people inherit now. A sleeping place did not need to be perfect to matter. It only needed to improve the terms of the night enough for the body to risk closing its eyes there. This is why shelter belongs so centrally in the history of unsafe sleep. It shows the human species doing what it would do again and again across time, taking a difficult environment and trying to reduce, redirect, or soften its pressures without ever fully escaping them. A cave, an overhang, a windbreak, a structure of wood or hide, a carefully chosen depression in the terrain, all of these could matter. They could make fire more effective, hold bodies together more tightly, protect the young, reduce direct exposure, and create a sense of direction in darkness. But even then, the shelter remained part of a living world. The night still pressed against it, weather still altered it, the ground inside it still affected the body. The boundary between human space and non-human space was still thin by modern standards. Somewhere near the origin point of human history, the body may have learned this distinction long before it could ever be spoken. Being sheltered was not the same as being safe. It was better than openness, but still unfinished. That unfinished quality may have shaped sleep itself. The body could relax more in one place than another, but not infinitely. The group could settle more deeply in a familiar shelter than on exposed ground, but still remain dependent on arrangement, maintenance, and luck. The place of rest could become good enough, then cease to be good enough when rain changed, smoke thickened, wind shifted, or the needs of the group changed. This keeps the title of the video honest all the way through. Humans slept without safety not because they failed to seek protection, but because protection for most of human history came in degrees rather than absolutes. Shelter was one of those degrees. It was one of the most important human inventions in the broadest sense, even before formal buildings, because it allowed sleep to happen within reduced exposure. Yet reduced exposure is not the same thing as secure sleep in the modern sense. The body still rested in a world that had not been fully tamed. Modern rooms often hide this truth because they embody the long accumulation of solved problems. Early human shelters reveal it because they stand much closer to the original condition. They show how much effort it took to create even a modest margin against the night, and how easily that margin could remain incomplete. In that way, shelter does not close the question asked by the title. It deepens it. It reminds us that for most of our existence, humans were not choosing between danger and perfect refuge. They were choosing between greater exposure and lesser exposure, and then sleeping inside the smaller of those two uncertainties. That may be one of the most human images of all. A body lying down, not because safety had finally been secured, but because enough shelter had been gathered for one more night to make rest possible before the world was ever truly at peace. For most modern people, the animal world is pushed to the edges of sleep. Walls, floors, screens, sealed food, controlled waste, and managed interiors create the impression that nighttime rest belongs almost entirely to humans. Other creatures are treated as distant, occasional, or unwelcome intrusions. But for most of human history, that separation was for thinner. Humans did not sleep outside the animal world. They slept inside it. Near the beginning of our species, the night did not belong only to human bodies trying to recover. It also belonged to the many other forms of life that moved, fed, searched, nested, hunted, bit, crawled, watched, and reacted after dark. This does not mean every ancient night was dominated by large threats. It means only that the sleeping human body remained part of a living ecological field that did not pause when humans became tired. That fact alone changes the meaning of safety. A sleeping place could be chosen with care, improved by fire, narrowed by shelter, and made more stable through the closeness of other humans. Yet it still existed within a wider world populated by animals with their own routines, senses, and needs. Some creatures posed obvious danger in certain contexts. Many more posed quieter burdens. Insects that bit, parasites that spread through contact and closeness, scavengers drawn by smell, rodents drawn by stored material or shelter, and other animals whose movements, sounds, or proximity could disturb sleep even when they did not attack. Near the origin point of human life, this would have mattered because human beings did not yet sleep inside strongly separated built environments. Their sleeping places remained open to the wider ecology around them. The body at rest was not only negotiating darkness, cold, ground, and uncertainty. It was also resting within a world where many other organisms were still active according to their own patterns. This is one reason the title of the video should not be understood too narrowly. Unsafe sleep was not only about rare moments of dramatic danger. It was also about repeated contact with a living world that could reach the sleeper in small and constant ways. A bite, a sound, a scent, a movement at the edge of firelight. The need to protect food, infants, or sleeping space from intrusion, all of these belong to a broader condition in which humans could not fully separate their nights from the nights of other animals. Even today, sleep can be altered by surprisingly small forms of animal presence. A mosquito can be enough. A scratching sound in the dark can be enough. The body does not require a great predator to lose ease. It only requires the sense that the sleeping place is shared by life beyond the self. If that remains true now inside heavily protected environments, then it becomes easier to imagine how much more immediate the animal world may have felt near the beginning of human history. This does not require exaggeration or fantasy. It is enough to see that humans were never sleeping alone in an empty landscape. They were sleeping in habitats already occupied. The group could carve out a margin against that reality, but not erase it. Fire might push some distance outward. Shelter might narrow entry. Habits of place and arrangement might reduce disturbance. Yet the wider animal world still surrounded the human one, especially at night, when many species became more active while human vision became less reliable. Somewhere near the start of our story as a species, this may have been one of the quietest truths of sleep. To lie down was not to exit the ecology of the night. It was to remain within it, softer, slower, and less able to respond. That is why the history of human sleep cannot be told as if only humans were present. For most of our existence, sleep took place in a world shared with other living creatures. And that shared world is part of what made safety so partial, so fragile, and so hard to complete. The danger of sleeping among other animals is easy to overstate if we imagine only the largest and rarest threats. But the history of unsafe human sleep becomes clearer when we think on many scales at once. A sleeping body can be troubled not only by what could kill it quickly, but by what can disturb it, bite it, infest it, steal from it, or force it to remain more alert than full rest would allow. For most of human history, these wider animal prisons would have mattered constantly, because humans did not sleep inside environments that fully excluded it. Near the beginning of our species, the sleeping place may have been warmed by fire, narrowed by shelter, and stabilized by group arrangement. Yet it still remained open in important ways to the non-human world around it. That openness changes the meaning of night. The body is no longer resting in a human-only interior. It is lying down within a shared biological space, where many forms of life continue their own routines after dark. Some animals may have been dangerous under certain conditions. Others may have been merely irritating. Yet irritation is not a small matter in the story of sleep. Repeated biting insects, crawling intrusions, parasites passed through close quarters, scavengers drawn by scent, and the sounds of other creatures moving nearby all make rest more fragile. Even when they do not create immediate catastrophe, a sleeper does not need proof of deadly danger to lose depth, continuity, or ease. The body can be drawn upward toward alertness by smaller pressures that accumulate through the night. This is one reason the title of the video should be understood as a long condition rather than a sequence of dramatic events. Humans slept without safety, partly because the sleeping place remained ecologically open. The line between human rest and the rest of animal life was real but thin. Fire could push some creatures back and shelter could narrow access, but neither could completely remove the wider living world from the night. Near the origin point of human life, this would have mattered even more, because the body itself was closer to the ground, closer to stored smells, closer to waste. closer to food remnants, closer to skins, plant matter, ash, and other materials that make a sleeping place readable not only to humans, but to other animals as well. What humans experienced as a place of rest could also appear to other creatures as warmth, scent, cover, or opportunity. This is not speculation beyond reason. It follows from the simple fact that sleeping humans occupied habitats already inhabited by other species, each with their own sensory world. The human group could organize itself against that fact, but not erase it. Even now, a small non-human presence can still shape sleep with surprising force. The sound of wings, the sense of movement, the awareness that something else is in the room, all of this can alter how the body rests. In deeper history, those sensations were less likely to be rare interruptions and more likely to be part of the ordinary background against which sleep had to occur. That is what makes the old human night feel so different from the modern one. It was not just darker, it was more biologically crowded. The sleeping body remained part of an ecosystem that did not accept human boundaries as fully as modern architecture now does. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, that may have been one of the quieter reasons sleep required so much arrangement, nearness, habit, and adaptation. Humans were not merely trying to rest in darkness. They were trying to rest in a world where other forms of life remained active, interested, and often unavoidable. The night did not belong to humans alone. And any history of sleep that forgets that shared ownership misses one of the deepest reasons safety remained incomplete for so long. The animal world did not merely surround human sleep. It entered into its conditions. This may be the clearest way to understand why most of human history could never treat the night as fully secure. Modern life often teaches people to think of animals as either distant nature or rare household disturbances, as though human sleep normally unfolds in a protected zone from which most other life has already been excluded. But across the greater span of human existence, that exclusion was weak, partial, and often impossible. Humans did not first build a sealed human night and then begin to rest inside it. They rested while still living among other creatures whose needs, movements, and senses continued after sunset.